Hi, it's Doug Standard with fearlesspresentations.com. One of the things that we tend to get folks who are coming to Fearless Presentations, one of the things that they want to get out of the class is to give high-level sales presentations. That's kind of my specialty, by the way. I mean, every one of our Fearless Presentations instructors have their own kind of niche or specialty things that they do. Mine is actually high-level sales presentations. And so a lot of times companies will hire me to come in if they have, big contracts where there's lots, millions and millions of dollars on the line. And I'll kind of coach them. So a couple of big challenges that I want to kind of lay out to you on these things. One of the big ones is that when you're designing a sales presentation, typically what most people do when they're starting out their sales presentation is they're thinking about what they want to tell the audience, and that's the exact opposite of the way you want to start designing your presentation. But the way you want to start designing your presentation is finding out what is it that the audience really wants to know. And if you start from that perspective, it's a whole lot easier. I'll give you a good example of this. The first couple of times that I went in and was helping out a lot of times when I'm doing this is for big construction companies or engineering firms or architectural firms, that kind of thing. They're trying to get building projects or building contracts. So most of the time it's for school districts or universities or big Fortune 500 companies that are going to be building a skyscraper, that kind of stuff. And more often than not, what will happen is these entities that are hiring the contractors or the project managers, the program managers, will have a group of people that will kind of weed through all the proposals, and they'll pick the top 5, 6, 7, 8 companies based on their proposals and have each one of them come in and present for 45 minutes to an hour. Well, more often than not, though, when I come in and coach people the first time, the point number one on each one of these presentations is almost always our experience, right? That's what they start off with. And it's basically, if you think about it from the audience's perspective, all the audience is hearing is, look how great we are. Woo hoo hoo, you should hire us because we're so awesome, right? You know what the audience cares about? Not a whit about that, right? The audience has problems and challenges that they want to fix. And if you can kind of focus your presentation on the challenges or problems that the audience has that they want to solve, you're much more likely to get these big projects. So the first step when you're designing one of these presentations is you have to forget that you're yourself and kind of put yourself in the shoes of the people in the audience and say, okay, if I'm on this school board, if I'm on this university committee, if I'm on this building committee, if I'm on a member of this Fortune 500 company committee, and I'm going to be hiring one of these big contractors, what are the things that I am most focused on, right? So like for instance, if it's a school district, one of the most important things to school districts has to do with time. Now, a lot of times we think it's money, but more importantly, a lot of times it's time, because school districts are on a very set schedule. School starts in the fall, school ends in the spring, and so most of the time that they have to do all the building, renovation, remodeling, all that kind of stuff is in the summer months, right? So basically, if you design your presentation based on the timing, especially how much work you can get done when there's no kids around, then you got a much better shot of getting that job. Because once the school year starts, all of a sudden you got a bunch of new problems. You got to keep kids away from the unsecure areas and dangerous areas and that kind of stuff. So it creates a lot bigger problems. Another thing about timing is if you're building new buildings or new schools or something like that. A lot of times it's based on the growth of the city, and so they have to hit a certain time schedule in order to make sure that funding goes through and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes the timing is really, really important. Safety is always important. So if you start with those kind of things and design your presentation based on the key things that are most important to that client or that audience, you're much more likely, like I said, to get them to get the deal. Let's say you're doing a sales presentation for a big Fortune 500 company, and you are presenting to C-level executives, high-level CEO, CFO, COO, CIO, any of the C-level people. Well, most of the time, if you're talking to the C-level people, the thing that they're really most interested in is how this project or how this thing that you're going to be bidding on is going to affect their bottom line. So if you can show them how they're going to make more profit if they go with you, or if you show them how they can cut their cost in order to make more profit if they go with you, now all of a sudden, you've got an audience. You've got something that the audience is really interested in. So the key thing on the sales presentations is you want to start off with what does this audience really need to know, and or what do they really want to know, and what are those most important things that they want to know, and then design your bullet points based on that. Now, if you haven't seen the way to design longer presentations, that's a good session to kind of look at before you start designing your sales presentation. But just kind of in review, typically what you're going to want to do in any kind of presentation, especially a sales presentation, is focus on just a few key concepts. The good rule of thumb is 4 plus or minus 1. So if you've got an hour to speak or 45 minutes to speak, you probably want to limit your bullet points in the entire speech to about 3, 4, 5 maybe, but it's usually around 4 or 5. The reason why is because they're not going to remember anything more than that, right? Especially if you're one of 8 companies that are 8 presenters, 8 presenting groups anyway, that are going to be giving speeches all day long. So they're going to have a really, really tough time focusing on every one of the little minute details. So when you're trying to figure out what these 3, 4, 5 things are that you need to cover, you just go back to what I mentioned before. You say, okay, what are the biggest challenges that this audience has? Challenge number 1 is timing. Challenge number 2 is safety. Challenge number 3 is, okay, maybe it's price. Whatever those 3 things are, and now I'm going to design my entire presentation on that. Now, what folks will kind of ask me at this point, a lot of times when I'm kind of coaching them, is they'll say, well, when exactly do we put in our experience? They're going to want to know, hey, have you done stuff like this before? Well, that's your proof that you use as your example that you can do each one of those bullet points. So like, for instance, if your first bullet point, if you're giving that presentation for the school district, and your first bullet point is that you can get a majority of the rework or the remodeling done for these big school district buildings in the summer months, then all you have to do is give them an example of sometime that you've done that before. So if you've done that with a specific school district in the past 2 or 3 years, you use that as your example. Now, if you've done it, I don't know, maybe 150 times in the last 20 years, hey, then you just tell them, hey, we've done this over and over and over, about 150 times in the last 20 years, we've been able to get the project done by September 1st, right? And then you just give them one specific example. So for example, a couple years ago, we worked with these such and such school districts and kind of tell them a little story, right? So your experience is your proof that you can do the bullet point. Same thing if bullet point number 2 is safety. Right? You just give an example of something that you were able to do that allowed for the kids walking around this campus to be more safe, right? So you give one example of something that you've done and use that to kind of prove that you can do it. So basically you just go through each one of these bullet points giving examples and stories, and then you add in some of the other impact ideas. There's a whole session on adding impact to your presentations. We give you 10 things that you can use to add impact. Analogies, audience participation probably is not going to work so much for the sales presentations, but analogies and anecdotes and samples and demonstrations and especially showmanship, which is probably one of the most valuable ones. The showmanship that you use in your sales presentation is really the thing that's going to set you apart. Sometimes your props can be your showmanship, but a lot of times it's the way that you deliver your presentation that's going to be more valuable. The energy, the enthusiasm that you have when you present, the way that you carry yourself can be important. I'll give you a couple of examples of some things that we've done in the past that kind of work really well. We did I worked with, speaking on the school district example, I worked with one of the very first companies that I ever did one of these coaching sessions for, had worked previously for 375 different school districts on projects similar to the one that they were competing for this time. And the way that they decided to emphasize this was they created a slide which kind of rolled up the back behind the guy who was speaking, and it was like a movie credit, and they had like all of the school districts listed alphabetically, all of the A's and then the B's, and they were just kind of rolling up the slide as just like at the end of a movie, that kind of thing, which was pretty cool. I mean, there's 375 of these things, so it went on forever, and he didn't really call attention to each one of the 375. He just kind of said, we've worked with 375 different school districts, they're kind of listed behind me, and like I said, it was really cool, but it wasn't the most effective use of showmanship though. So basically what we decided to do to kind of jazz that up a little bit was we decided to make a poster for each one of those school districts that they'd worked for. Basically for every one of those 375 school districts, they had on their intranet, they had folders that had dozens, if not hundreds, of different pictures of finished projects in each one of those, right? So what we did was just pick the best picture out of each one of those folders, and they made boards out of them, or posters. And we actually, by the time that the presentation was coming around, we only were able to do about 125 of them, but still it was pretty impressive because we had 125 of those posters. When we came in, they put them all around the room to where you could just see just little pieces of each one of them. And every time that the guys would give an example of one of these school districts that they'd work for, they would go and pick up one of those posters and they'd put it up on the tripod, and then they would kind of talk about that specific poster, and then they would put it back. And they'd go over to the other side and they'd pick up that poster and put it on the tripod and talk about that one. And they'd pick another one and put it up on the tripod. They did it about 6 or 7 times in the 45 minutes that they were speaking. And the cool thing about that particular example was that since they had really good stories for each one of the 6 or 7 that they kind of pulled out, the automatic inclination that the people in the audience had is that if they had a good story for each one of the ones that they pulled out, guess what? There were probably 120 plus more stories that we didn't get a chance to hear. And so it made it to where the showmanship that they used made it to where they could really show their experience in a very, very effective way. So, keep an eye on your showmanship. One of the projects that I worked on, this was actually not a group that I was coaching, this was one that we were competing against. One of their big things was the timing and the schedule, because they knew that the company that was hiring was most emphatically, the thing that was most important to them anyway, was the schedule, keeping to that schedule. And so what this company did was they created this huge board. It must have been a good 20 foot long. It went from one side of the room to the other, and it had the project schedule on it. So basically they were saying that we've already assumed that you've hired us. We've created the project schedule for you. Here's what we've got, and here's how we're going to stick to it. And they gave their whole presentation on how they were going to stick to that project schedule and how they've done it in the past, and they would do it on theirs as well. And so very, very effective use of their visuals, and very effective use of showmanship to kind of reinforce the thing that the audience was most looking for. So when you design these sales presentations, you really want to focus most importantly on what the audience wants. Give them just a few key bullet points, and then give some examples and use showmanship to really sell your ideas. Now, just in closing, one of the things that will tend to come up a lot in these is that, especially when you're dealing with bureaucracies and committees and that kind of thing, they want to make sure that everybody's on an even playing field. And so typically what will happen is 24 hours before you're going to give the presentation, they're going to send over in an email or a fax or something, they'll send over an agenda, and they'll say, we want you to cover these 27 things in your presentation. Usually it's a very short window that they give you to kind of cover those 27 things too. And in addition to that, one of the other things that you'll tend to find is that a lot of times they'll have these score sheets. So each person on the committee will have their score sheet, and they'll score each team based on their, how they think they gave the presentation, that kind of thing. The thing you want to keep in mind about each one of those things, the agenda that they give you and the score sheet, is for the most part, what I find is that they're irrelevant. You want to pay very little attention to those things. Don't get caught up on the agenda that they give you. Don't get caught up on the score sheets, because here's the way both of those things work. Very rarely are they going to go down that score sheet and check off, yep, they covered that. Now, if you are afraid that they are going to do that, the way that I have people handle that is they go through the score sheet in about the first 3 minutes. They say, okay, this is the score sheet you gave us. These are the answers to the question. Boom, 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 boom. Now, based on what we think is most important to you, we're going to focus on number 3 here, and number 2, or number 7, and number 15, right? And then kind of go through that way, and that typically works a whole lot better. On the score sheet, here's the reality about the score sheet. What will tend to happen is the very first group, they will make a decision on how good the very first group was, and they will score that group appropriately. Let's just say that it's on a scale of 1 to 10, and they get 5s all the way across, right? The second group that presents, if they present a little bit better than the first group, guess what they're going to get? 6 or 7, right? If somebody hits it out of the ballpark, they're a 10, right? So if somewhere along the way they see what they think is a 10, and then later on, an hour later, another group presents and they're even better than the one that was a 10, then what they do is they go back and they start changing the numbers on the first group down to a 9 or an 8 or that kind of thing. So the thing that you want to keep in mind is that the score sheets don't really matter. What they're looking for is who can they work with? Who is it that comes in and they think that will do the job effectively and get along well with their people and work well as a team and not create a lot of hardship for them. And when they determine which company that is, that's who gets the highest scores, right? So keep in mind that when you're designing your presentation, do a good job on the presentation, do a good job on the delivery, have lots of energy and enthusiasm, use your showmanship, use those examples, and if you do that, you'll get the high score. So want to sell some of these high-level, multi-gazillion-dollar contracts, use those key tips and you're much more likely to close them.